Hey, welcome to Hindsight the Podcast. I'm your host, Lee Jones, and I'm thrilled to embark on this journey of exploration with you. We often find ourselves reflecting on the choices we've made and wondering how our lives might have unfolded differently if we had taken a different path. Here's the beauty of hindsight. It gives us a chance to gain wisdom and learn from our past decisions. Look, this podcast is a platform to dig deep into those pivotal moments and uncover the invaluable lessons hidden within. Each episode we'll hear from remarkable guests, from entrepreneurs and artists to scientists and thought leaders who have faced critical decisions and embraced the lessons that emerged. We'll explore their journeys, their triumphs, and the challenges they've encountered along the way. Together, we'll unpack the decision-making process, discuss strategies to make better choices, and examine the impact our decisions have on our relationships, careers, well-being, and overall fulfillment. So whether you're looking to gain clarity on a current crossroad, seeking inspiration from incredible stories, or simply intrigued by the fascinating world of decisions, Hindsight the Podcast is here to guide you on this transformative journey. So get ready to embark on a path of self-discovery, growth, and enlightenment as we unlock the power of hindsight together. Look, I'm Lee Jones, your host, and I couldn't be more excited to have you on board. So let's dive right in and explore the fascinating realm of decisions on Hindsight the Podcast.
When you look back in hindsight, everything is 2020. In hindsight, you make mistakes, we're learning from it. In hindsight, shaping yesterday and your tomorrow. In hindsight, is so much clearer now. This is Hindsight the Podcast, and introducing your host, Lee Jones.
Today's guest is a Bangladeshi-born British author, artist, and poet, best known for her award-winning novel, Written. And it's a heartwarming story of a girl's struggle for freedom and the uncovering of an intricate plan laced around 40 years of secrets, betrayal, and lies in a family desperate to preserve their culture and honor. Dhipa is a feminist who is actively empowering women to speak their truth. Welcome to Hindsight the Podcast, Dhipa. How are you doing?
Thank you, Lee. Yeah, absolutely fine. Really lovely day in the UK. So, really enjoying the weather here today.
I tell you what, it was some great weather finally here as well in Southern California.
Oh, wow.
I don't know how much news you get over there about California, but it rained pretty much the whole month of March and into April. And if you heard the song It Never Rains in Southern California, they made that song alive this year.
Well, that's got to be a record for me because in the UK, as everybody knows, we're famous for rain. And so it's quite refreshing to hear that other places in the world do get affected by rain a little bit too.
Oh, well, it was refreshing for us too, because typically we go 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 months without rain. Where I live at, it's in the desert, but it still has its beauty, but it has its struggles when it just doesn't rain, right? So this year was a great year to start off.
Grass is always greener.
The grass is always greener. I love it. So, Dhipa, first of all, thank you for coming on the show. I started following you on Instagram, and I first of all, I just want to say that I absolutely love your message that you're putting out on Instagram. I enjoy. Look, I live through you a little bit with your travels, so you're all over the place doing lots of things. Just tell us a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I would love to. Well, you already gave me a really great intro. So my family originally from Bangladesh. I grew up here in the UK and I was born in Bangladesh and I lived with my mum and dad for a couple of years before they migrated to the UK. And my parents were Bangladeshi born, but my father came to the UK in the 60s, really, and he set up his business here. He had a restaurant, Indian restaurant,
Mm-hmm.
and then he settled here, and then he brought my family and my brother and I over to the UK, and we settled here and grew up here. So we have a very kind of mixed heritage, really, in terms of how I grew up, and that was a really treacherous journey for me because my family, my parents were very much native Bangladeshi speakers. They were also adopted, of course, the traditions and the cultures from Bangladesh. And growing up here was very much about navigating the expectations they had of me and my brother, and then my extended family, of course, that were also raised in our household as well. So yeah, I'm a Bangladeshi born British author, and yeah, I'm also a mum as well. So I have 2 boys, and I also work in tech. So I also have my bread and butter, if you like, is technology and looking at tech, but I also do a raft of things. So I'm really interested in cultivating a better mindset for women. So I'm very much about empowering women. And my South Asian roots is also something that I'm trying to bring awareness to in the UK, more about how we have to kind of change the mindset a little in order to strike a balance with how we go about living a fairly traditional, adopting some of the traditional ideas, but also balancing it out with the very modern Western ways as well.
Right.
So I talk a lot about that on my channel on Instagram as well, and also my book, which I guess we're going to talk about in a bit as well, really covers in depth about this navigation of this journey through culture, Eastern, Western culture.
Wow. So you touched on it a little bit, but how did you live in Bangladesh at all?
No, so I was born there. I was 2 years old when my family came here, so I really didn't know anything or remember anything about it. But I did go back to Bangladesh for a few months on a visit when I was about 12 years old. And that was a really interesting, insightful visit to really look at my roots and look at where my family are from and the reasons why perhaps they adopted a lot of these very traditional ideas and values of how they raise their children as well.
That's interesting. So how was it for you growing up? Because I'm only assuming, so you tell me if I'm wrong, that maybe when you went to school or you did things, kids were a little differently, or their families were a little differently than how maybe your family was coming up. So how was it being a child and growing up, and then to grow up, to touch on this last point, you went back to Bangladesh and maybe you got sort of a better understanding of where your parents were coming from as well. So if you can touch on those 2 points a little bit.
Definitely. So growing up in a traditional Bangladeshi or South Asian household is very different to what the Western households raise their children. For one, we speak a different language at home. My parents really wanted to allow us to learn a new language, and they made it a very strict rule to speak in Bengali at home. And it was actually a really great thing that they did, because it forced us to learn a new language, and obviously we learned it passively, so that made it easy for us to learn it. But with their roots came a lot of good things, but also a lot of bad things as well. So some of the Eastern cultural things didn't always work with the West, such as the clothing we wore, perhaps even how we studied at home. My family didn't really have a real drive to or an appreciation for education and how much it's needed in the UK, and how much without the education it's very difficult to expand your horizons and your career opportunities. So all those kind of facets of growing up were a little bit difficult for me, especially being a woman, because they traditionally, women in Bangladeshi communities and families, they want their daughters married at a very young age. And so one of the big challenges I had was being kind of conditioned to think that I had no other prospects for me other than being married at the age of 16. And one of the biggest objectives my mother had was that I would finish secondary school, or high school, you might call it in the US, and be married to a cousin of mine who was probably around about 15, 20 years older than me. And to go back to Bangladesh and live there with him. And that's this whole traditional idea that they had was absolutely scary for me, because that was not the route I wanted to go down. That was not the idea I had in my head about my future and how I would live my life.
Right. Wow. So okay. So 2 questions again. I'd like to double them up. What did you do for fun, right, as a child, and maybe even now, right? I know you like to travel, but what did you do for fun as a child? And when did the weight of knowing that you would have to marry at least by the age of 16 set in for you as a child, and how much did that weigh on your psyche?
Absolutely. So growing up, one of the amazing things about where I grew up was it was all in the north of the UK, in an area called Lancashire, which is just beautiful hills and lots of countryside. It was a small town that I grew up, and you felt so safe. You could leave the door open all the time. Nobody's going to barge in or steal anything. It was a really safe place. And the things that I used to do for fun really was really ponder and look beyond those hills. I mean, for me, from my window, I could see the entire town. I had the views of the hills and the countryside, the rolling hills. And for me, growing up and being in that little area of mine, that little small town, just was more than enough, and having my family and around me was more than enough. But when things started to change was getting a bit older, and think from around about 10 or 11, when on my visit to Bangladesh, I overheard this conversation about this idea that they wanted me to get married. My mother, just to give you a little bit of background, my mother was married off to my dad, who is 20 years older than her, at the age of 12. And in her mind, she always had this idea that would be her ultimate ambition for me. And so when we went to Bangladesh, it kind of was, I discovered that they were also trying to achieve the same thing for me. And that frightened me to the point where I knew that was not for me. That was not going to be my life, and that was not going to be my future ever. So I set about a plan to really study really hard and really make sure I had a really good education, and I fought for that education such that wouldn't ever be the choice that was going to be thrown into.
Wow. So, okay. So let me go back. Actually, it's not going back, but let's just clarify. So did you have to get married at 16 and maybe get an annulment or something? Did that ever happen? No?
Luckily for me, no, because I did really work hard for my education, I spent a lot of time convincing my family that wasn't the option for me. That was not the way I was going to live my life. And a mixture of lobbying really hard and speaking to lots of family friends and close relatives, to really make sure that's not the path they wanted to take for me, resulted in not having to be married off to my cousin,
Right,
or
right.
years older than me, which is a really good news. Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. What else did you? So you spoke specifically about this topic, but what else did you learn? What were some insightful things that you learned on your trip back to Bangladesh?
I love this question. Um, in the West, we tend to be very much geared towards money, and education is so that you can get a job, and education
Right.
is for um, getting into the workforce and then making a career and then moving up the ladder, and then you can buy material things and have a great time and great life, and that's a lot of what we are all geared towards in the West. But going to Bangladesh made me realize wealth is seen in a completely different way.
Mm,
Um, the what if you're a tourist going to Bangladesh, you would consider seeing a mud hut with people living on very basic means, such as a little bit of rice or a little bit of water.
hmm
You'd consider that poor and poverty, and they can't be really existing like this, and they must be
Right.
suffering. But in Bangladesh, I met the most happiest people I've ever met, and they were living on the most basic things, what we would consider basic.
Right.
And it was a real insight for me to see that you can be happy with the most simplest things as long as you are happy within yourself. And I think there is an element, of course, yeah, we're all going to have a bit of suffering, or there's going to be, it may be a little bit harder.
hmm hmm
But I don't, my biggest lesson from there was that I was not any more happier here as I was there. It wouldn't have, the inside happiness that you gain does not come from the external aspects, it comes from the internal aspects. And seeing myself in the most humblest places made me realize that I was beyond wealthy and beyond happy because of my inner happiness, rather than the external factors, which normally present as being the main thing that would make people happy.
Wow.
It was really insightful for me to go there. And yes, definition of poverty is, we're all running around with hardly any clothes on, and I can't even afford to feed our families and things like that. But actually, the poorest were happy as long as they could go fishing and get some fish and have a meal at the end of the day with their family. They were happy that they had shelter. They were happy that their children were healthy. And if
Right.
you think about it, the real essence of life is that we have those main 5 or 6 objectives. That we're healthy, that we're happy inside, that we're clear of
Safe.
problems and safe, and we
Yeah.
have shelter, and once we get all those things ticked off, then really we're complete. It's just we bolt on all these ideas, sophisticated ideas, that this is all these external things will make us greater, happier, and all these things. But actually, in essence, they're just add-ons and bonuses. And when I take that away, it makes me think, I don't actually need a lot. I just need to make sure I can get those things together, and everything else that I achieve in my life is greatly going to benefit somebody, maybe. And that's the main objective now.
Yeah. Wow. That's you know what? A lot of people don't have, and even me, right? A lot of people don't have an opportunity to be able to compare two different, not
Mm,
necessarily existences. I think that's too strong of a word, but cultures, right?
mm,
Locations around the world, and then make that distinction instead of, our first thing is to judge. Oh, they're poor, right?
mm.
And instead of understanding and kind of immersing yourself in that culture while you're there, and getting that experience. So it's really I'm using these big words.
Yeah,
it's really good. I'll keep it simple. To hear that you had that experience, right? And then that makes everything else that you do going forward, easier, I think, to attain because these are the main things that I have to focus on. And if we're good here, then all this other stuff, like you said, is icing on the cake. Like
Yeah,
it's just
it,
potentially making things
it's
better,
kind of
right?
like, I my dad, for example, would sit under the stars, um, and he'd be happy there, just sitting under the stars and sleeping under the stars. But some people might call that homeless, and
Yeah,
and uh, it's kind of just perspective and really understanding that it's how you want to define it that actually is the key to it. For example, I mean, some of the things that I really love is that during COVID, a lot of people had to stay at home and they didn't really go out anywhere. And um, when some people might say, "Oh, I'm feeling cooped up and imprisoned," in our homes, or you could say, "I'm feeling safe in my home." So I think
right.
it's the same place. It's just the mindset of how you approach it and how you deal with that and how you look at it. I mean, my dad could have walked around Bangladesh and said he's homeless because he's sleeping under the stars, but he didn't do that. So,
Right.
yeah, I really think that was a massive takeaway for me to go there and see it like this. And poor people there don't consider themselves poor.
Yeah.
They consider themselves wealthy. They consider themselves adequate and happy, and they're not comparing themselves to the big tall skyscrapers of UK and the money that goes around here.
Yeah. That's amazing. Um, do you plan to go back again?
I've got to admit, I have no real plans of
Yeah,
going
yeah.
back.
I get it.
My children are always inquisitive, and I think it would be a really insightful trip to go to Bangladesh or maybe other countries like that. Travel around with them and really give them perspective because that really grounded me. And I think sometimes we uh, get so consumed in all of these worldly things that we forget that
Right.
actually, we need to find happiness within ourselves before we bolt all these extras on that we have around us.
Right. Right. Good. It looks like you give, and maybe it's the same trip all the time, and I know it's not, right? But it looks like you give your kids an opportunity to experience different cultures as well. It looks like you travel a lot, and your family does a lot of things together. So that's pretty
Mm,
amazing. Being in the military, we traveled a lot, so my family got to see a lot of different things. But we were mostly in the United States. Now I was in
mm,
other places and got to experience different cultures and have a different perspective. Like it's always good to get out of your comfort,
mm.
right, and
Mm.
see from a different perspective, and then that expands your knowledge in your actually it helps with your decision making, right, because
Yeah,
now
I've
you've
got to say that is one of the most important reasons I want to exist and live is for the experience of everything.
hmm
And I think that's the same idea that my family, my husband and I and the children, we want to adopt that idea of curiosity and really living for those experiences. Even if it is just to take a walk and really be in tune with nature or
hmm
see something and learn. It's really all about the learning and the journey that we have while we're here. And the material things, they're just we're not so focused on that. It's not that important to us. The real thing is the real beauty is how much have we managed to experience, and what have we learned from all of it.
right.
And yeah, I really love that aspect of my life with my family.
Now you gave me one already, and it was pretty powerful, right, and you gave us the reason why you did it or made this decision. But can you share a choice that you had to make and how your decision affected your life, good or bad?
Mm. Oh goodness, Lee, I'm going to go deep here, but because I think growing up in a very Eastern traditional cultural family really had some major challenges, and there was one thing that stayed with me my entire life and was a really difficult choice I had to make, but one that actually empowered me and completely changed my trajectory in life. And that was the idea that in Eastern families, the way in which children are brought up is very much about uniformity and submission. So you had to comply to very religious ideas and traditional thinking ideas. The family had a lot of expectation on you. You had to you were told you didn't have any choice. You didn't have any choice in who you married. You didn't have any choice in where you went for a career, or what career you decided to go for. Or it was very, very strict family upbringing. And so most of my life I grew up thinking I didn't have a choice, and
Right.
to a point where I ended up being married in an arranged marriage to a man that my family approved of, just so that I could get their approval. And what happened in the end was that fear and all of these controlling ideas had me feeling compelled to do things by my family, which was, marry this person and, you will be accepted in our community, you'll be accepted in our family, we'll support you, we'll do all these wonderful, things, we'll be happy. And what I discovered very early on in that marriage was that this wasn't the right choice for me. This was not the right thing for me. And how do I break away from this, without losing my entire family and everybody going against me and all of these difficulties that I would have with being abandoned or kind of outcasted from my family. So this was a really big hurdle for me, because I don't know what it would be like for you, but imagine your family saying, I don't want to speak to you anymore if you decide to divorce this guy or divorce this woman. And you had to make a choice about whether you would stay in that marriage and keep your whole family and your entire generation, or leave and decide you are going to go on your own and figure out what you need to do for your life.
Right.
And I think that was a really difficult, really pressurized decision I had to make. And in the end, I had to go with my heart, and my instincts were that this wasn't the right thing for me. This was not the right life. And I didn't want to go around being a lie. I don't want to lie to myself, and I don't want to lie to anybody else. This is not right for me. And in the end, I left. But leaving that marriage made me realize so many things. One, that I have a choice.
Okay.
I have a choice in every little aspect of my life. I have a choice in even the tiniest thing. And that was something completely a revelation to me. I didn't know, up until that point, I didn't know I had a choice.
Oh.
And so that's just the way in which I feel this is the thing that I've learned the most, and I really want to bring to the table in terms of the South Asian community and the way in which women are conditioned and feeling pressured into going down a path which doesn't really feel right for them, and then living a very empty and soulless life. And now I live every day knowing that I am in control and I have choices, and I can choose every little tiny thing that I want. Even the thoughts I have are a choice I'm making intentionally.
Right.
And when I live with that intentional approach to life, I realize I'm empowered to do anything I want to do for the rest of it, and change every day, change every aspect of it as I want to and I need to. And that was a really big life lesson for me, in that it was a kind of massive journey for me to actually encounter that and actually overcome it and come out of that and actually be able to say that, look, you can make these choices, and you shouldn't feel pressure to be in these types of situations. You really can empower yourself and find your own path to to reach the desired outcome for yourself.
So how did that decision impact your relationship with your family?
Well, I mean, they completely were against it. It
Did they
was
come
like
did they come
a
around
dream for
eventually?
them. It was, sorry.
I'm sorry, did they come around eventually?
I think it's still very fractured,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's kind of like, culturally, you're not one of us.
Mhm.
That's the way it feels like for them, that that I'm not one of them, and that I betrayed them, or betrayed my upbringing and everything they've taught me, and all these things. And it hurts a lot, because um, it doesn't stop you loving your family, no matter what culture and what's happened, or whether you have right or wrong or anything. You never stop loving the people that were once part of your life.
Yeah.
And I think to have this kind of feeling of being shut out from all of that, it's still painful.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I think what's really important for women like myself, to really understand, is that making a stand for these things is absolutely pivotal in order for these types of community mindsets to change, and really for people to learn that, look, living within these constructs are not giving any community any real anything back. In reality, we're living a very kind of soulless existence if people feel like they're confined to these ideas.
Yeah.
And social media and many other communities that are raising awareness about these topics are really bringing together a change in the mindsets of these communities. And I think in generations from now, I think we'll be in a completely different place, where these ideas just no longer have any real benefit to communities, to live in this way. I agree that traditions such as clothing and food and things that you do, they're wonderful, they're brilliant. But I think these ideas of completely controlling people's decisions on their own personal life, I think they definitely need a change in a good way for
Right.
people to benefit from them.
Wow. So I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm gonna ask you anyway. So knowing what you know right now, right? Do you think you'd make the same decision that you did back then to kind of, you know, take a left turn instead of, going on with what your family expected of you?
Oh goodness, yeah, absolutely. I would make the same if I went back in time. And I spoke to younger Deepa. I'd say, girl, you're making the right choice. Go, go, go,
It's awesome.
go do your thing. Don't stay here. So yeah, I think definitely. And I'm an advocate for this everywhere. Everywhere I go, this is my main
Right.
message: is that you've got to do right by you, no matter how much it hurts somebody else. It's got to be genuine. It's got to be real. It's got to be your real truth, your golden truth. And you can find it. It's in you. You feel it all the time. You feel it in everything you do. And keep that light shining, because that is so important. That is what's going to keep giving. That's where you're going to be the sensation to other people, and that's how you will generate good in the world.
Absolutely. So this whole topic is a great segue to your award-winning book, Written, and you're
Mm,
going back and telling young Deepa to, stay with your gut, right? Go with your gut, right? How much of young Deepa is represented, and maybe even older Deepa is represented in your book, in your novel?
yeah, absolutely. So, Written is about a little girl who was told her entire life was planned from birth, and she had no choice but to adhere to her parents' plan and live by that. And the notion written is actually taken from a very cultural, I would say Islamic, but it's kind of more of a cultural mindset that destiny is written already. So your whole plan, your whole everything that's happening to you is actually already written. It was all as part of the grand plan. And written is about this young girl who's been told that, you know, everything, she's got to accept everything, and her coming to a head with these decisions is where she starts to question and challenge a lot of what's going on, which leads to her realizing that this is not for her. And yes, a lot of the storyline, although it's fictional and written with fictional characters, has been inspired from my own experiences of growing up in a sort of traditional Eastern culture, but navigating that in a very Western society, right. and looking at all of the intricacies around growing up, the psychological effects of marriage, forced or arranged or manipulated marriages, and how the community reacts when things don't quite fall into place with their thinking. And so I wrote it really initially. I hadn't intended it to be a book. It was very much a journal. And the idea was I just wanted to get my thoughts out because I couldn't understand, because I was living in such confines. I couldn't understand why I felt so strange about this whole way in which I was asked to exist. And I just had to get my feelings out on paper. And then probably around back about 15, 16 years ago, I came across this journal and I was reading through it and I laughed and I said, gosh, Dhipa, you've written like a novel here. And it's like 40,000 words, penned, in a journal. And I laughed, and like literally 2 weeks after that, I started getting these really strange emails, messages coming into my inbox. And it was something like, how to write your own novel, how to, write your own book, write your book. This is what I did. I was also in tech and banking, but I also wrote my book. And I kind of thought, gosh, why am I getting this? This is really strange. I can't write a book. There's no way I can write a book. But then this idea was planted in my head and it just wouldn't go away, Lee. Right. It was like everywhere I went, I had this nagging message and it kept saying, write me. And I just kept saying, I haven't got time to write. I mean, I've got 2 children. I've got a baby. I've got, a 9-month-old and a 1-year-old. There's no way I'm in anywhere that I'm going to be able to write. But it just kept nagging me. And I said, okay, I woke up one day and I said, okay, I'll write it. And it was like, I sounded like a lunatic because I was talking to myself. I will write it, but I don't have the time. Right. And then it was like, find the time,
Yeah.
And so I began this idea of writing the manuscript for written. And initially it was just on the train and back. That was the only time I had between my having two kids, only a year apart from each other, and a full-time job working in a bank. And right. So I would take the train, which was a 30-minute train, and I would write 1,000 words on the train there, and then 1,000 words on the train back. And it was sometimes standing as well in between the aisleway while I'm writing. And eventually, over a couple of years, I had this something in the region of 250,000 words of writing, which had to then get transcribed into a kind of a book which would make sense to people. And of course, my community that I was really targeting was really the South Asian community, of course.
Right.
So lots of people have read my book from across the world, and I've found it really insightful as well, just understanding the culture and perhaps even understanding as well, like from a story point of view.
Yeah.
Have really enjoyed reading it, and just as a novel. But yeah, that's a little bit about how it all began, really.
That's pretty cool. So do you have something in your head saying to write book or novel number 2, or have you already written that, or what do you got going on next?
Oh yeah, there's lots of different ideas floating around, and I'm sure it's going to start nagging at me straight after this podcast. And so I do have another book idea. And yeah, it started. I started the process. I think it needs my commitment now to really bring it together, and I think that's where I am right now, is really trying to bring the idea together.
Okay.
um and of course my first love is written, because really that was everything in that book is really to the core of me, and it's really about really speaking my truth and really speaking from the heart, and everything that was written was really from that point of view, because it initially started as a journal, and journals are very much your very inner thoughts. And so I think that still has a burning desire to be out in the world and to be meeting lots of people. And in fact, it's been on more holidays than I have, I've got to say. I watch with envy when I see people reading the book on islands and holidays and things like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, as long as it keeps doing its thing, I'm going to be happy as well.
Right, right. That's pretty cool. That's awesome. I tell you what, I want to write a book,
Hmm.
and I'm waiting on that voice that you heard to to thrust me into action, right? I've started writing like a lot of short stories and stuff like that, so pretty good at that. But I do have a desire to want to write a novel.
Yeah,
I do have a desire to want to write a nonfiction book as well.
you should
Um,
go for it, Lee. Honestly, is I think there's a saying, isn't there, that there's a book in everyone. There's a story
right,
in everyone, and I think the more we can share these stories, the more insightful it is for everyone. You know, to it actually also just a way of leaving your legacy behind as well. You know, to really
right.
have that piece of you that's out there and circulating. I really think it's something special when you get into the flow, and I do think there is a little bit of that. You know, that you just need to get into a routine or a cycle, and eventually you'll get the ball rolling in no time.
Yeah, I'm really inspired by your dedication. Listening to you writing your 1,000 words, standing on the train or sitting or however it happens. Like, this is the time that I have at this point in my life to write, and you took full advantage of that time. Is very inspirational. So definitely appreciate that bit of, once again, inspiration.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So, so what? I've asked you a few questions, and I appreciate you. It's Hindsight the Podcast, so I appreciate you going back and, you know, maybe reliving some of your experiences growing up and how things are now with you. But is there anything that maybe you'd like to share that I haven't asked you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing that I'm always going to consistently talk about is the need to really find yourself, find your golden truth. And I think the most important message that I can take or give anybody from my book or from my journey is really, really looking inside of yourself to find what it is that gives you that spark and gives you that urge to keep striving for something better. And I really think that's my, in essence, what all of this was all about. The book, the way I'm living my life, the kind of perspective I have is all around this idea: am I really living my real golden truth? In essence, is this really me or not really me?
Right.
And I think, yeah, I think your podcast was a really interesting one to talk on, because I think that's the biggest takeaway is that how much of you is really living the real you, and authentically as possible. And I think if I can spread that message around, then I'm doing my job. I'm doing what I'm here to be. And I really thank you for giving me the opportunity to share that message and really talk a little bit about that as well.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. It is important because I won't talk for everybody. I struggle with, trying to differentiate how do I say this? What are the things that I need to do, one, to motivate myself to be the best me that I can be,
Mm,
right? And a lot of times you aren't the best you because I'm uh, kind of not necessarily confused, but you're inundated with these other ideas of how you should be, right?
mm,
From other people's perspectives.
absolutely, yeah.
You know what I mean? So having you have this conversation, right? Because you took a big step,
Mm,
right? And I'm sure it was some challenging times, going through once you made that decision on the direction you were going, right? But
mm,
that's who you needed to be. That's who you are supposed to be, not what
yeah.
they want you to be. You know what I mean?
Mm,
So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing that message, right? Because that
absolutely.
not only may inspire someone listening, but it inspires me as well. So thank
Absolutely.
you.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a real honor to be here and being able to talk to you and catch up with your audience as well on this topic. And I hope that it can help inspire others to really live their fullest life and really find their truest self as well.
Absolutely. Deepa, it's been so much fun. I shouldn't say fun because this was a good conversation, but this was very insightful, right? And I really enjoyed getting to know you a little better. And once you do decide you're going to write your book and maybe, during the process or when you complete it, wherever it makes sense, I'd love to have you back on the show.
That would be awesome. I would love to do that to share any new insights into on this show and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Lee.
Thank you. Okay, well, you take care and we'll keep in touch. Until later. Thanks, Deepa.
Thank you, Lee. Bye for now.
Bye for now. Thanks for tuning in to Hindsight the Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I know I did. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay updated on future episodes packed with inspiring stories. Before you go, leave me a message with your thoughts, feedback, or suggestions for future topics. And if you're loving what you hear, please take a moment to rate this episode. Your feedback helps me to grow and reach more listeners just like you. So remember, life's a journey. Stay tuned, stay curious, and keep gaining wisdom through the power of hindsight. Until next time. Oh, and don't forget, subscribe, leave a message, and rate this episode.